And we are back. Our next panel, the evolution of the Chief Marketing Officer. Panelists, Matt Mobley, President of CRM at Zeta. We have Anisha Raghavan, Chief Marketing Officer at Global Brands America's Walgreens Boots Alliance. We have Kofi Amoo-Gottfried, Chief Marketing Officer for DoorDash. Bonin, Bough, Chief Strategy Officer at Group Black. Linda Boff, Chief Marketing Officer, Vice President, Learning and Culture, President at GE Foundation.
Hi, Linda. You can't see us, but hi.
Very good.
The evolution of the CMO is sometimes she works from home
That's right. That's exactly right.
With a brand new puppy.
Yes,
with a brand new puppy.
that's right. Thank you, everyone, for coming up and sitting through this session. Thank you, panelists, for coming in. We greatly appreciate it as we go through. As Linda said, we'll be talking about sort of the evolution of the CMO. I mean, I think the funny thing is it's gone through so much change. You know, it's almost, Anisha and I were talking a little bit about it, is like, where do you stop when you're talking about it? There are so many different topics as we go through there. So I think we'll just get right into it without, too much sort of early area. But I'll just kick it off with, tell me a little bit, Anisha, about the change that you've seen so far as you think about the role of the CMO and everything else.
It's such a broad question, so
I
I'll
know.
start
That's
it.
what I said.
Everybody
Pick your topic.
So, today, CMOs are expected to be everything from brand storytellers to trend spotters to data and digital experts to revenue drivers. And what we've seen is, as a result of that, which all is because obviously technology has advanced and consumer behavior has shifted and COVID happened, is the CMO role is super undefined. And from one organization to another, there's no clear definition of what it is. And so there's a few implications out of that I see, or that I've experienced myself. One is a huge need to focus. And, sometimes a good strategy has more no's in it than yeses. And in order to focus, that's the number two, is really staying close to the consumer. But how you do that has evolved so much. So, 10 years ago, the big thing was ethnography studies. And 5 years ago, it was social listening. And the other day, I was having dinner with an entrepreneur in the neuro-insight space who hooks up electrodes to a consumer's head and monitors their behavior as they're looking at stimulus like advertising, because consumers don't know what they want today. They're just so bombarded by new platforms and tons of information and messaging from brands and all that kind of stuff. And then I think the third one, which is the hardest one to accomplish, but probably the most important, is really getting clear with your internal stakeholders, your CEO, your board, on what success looks like for the CMO role, because it is, again, completely different from one organization to another. And there's all these crazy stats out there from companies like Spencer Stuart and Deloitte, like 80% of CEOs are dissatisfied with their CMO, or it's the shortest tenure C-suite position. And on the other side of it, how the CMO feels, 95% of them say revenue is one of their top metrics, but 6% of them actually feel set up to deliver that. So that's where I think two-way transparent conversations on expectations and aligning those up front is so important. And a lot of people don't do that, and they don't redo it every year, because those expectations can change from year to year based on the business needs. Or, I got a new CEO. I didn't want to assume that person is going to assume the same, expectations. I needed to revisit the conversation. So those are just a few examples of how it's evolved for me and some of my peers.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, as you talked about a little bit about the, not only the expectations, but the KPIs and things like that. I mean, Linda, as you think about how the CMO is measured today versus the past, how have you seen sort of the changes in the expectation of what you have to deliver to? Of course, there's always the top line, and there's always sort of, pieces of that, but, a lot of the other ways that you look at how you achieve that has started to change, and how you sort of score it, per se.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Matt. And I'm going to build a little bit on where Anisha was. Anisha was talking a moment ago about stakeholders, and one of the things that I have seen to answer your question is the role of CMO is a role that, even within what we once called marketing, I think that mix is changing. And I think there's more in the way of not just the good list that Anisha went down and everything that we are confronting and gratefully so with data and technology, but with communications, with reputation, with thought leadership. But the stakeholder point is to me one of the most interesting ones. I was thinking about this in advance of the panel. I probably spend more time with people outside of the marketing function today, and that's both our CIO, our head of IR, our CFO, our head of HR, our general counsel. And I do think that one of the most important things as marketers that we can bring forward is that external voice, the voice of the customer. Sometimes the customer is the actual customer. Sometimes the customer is the employee. Sometimes the customer is the investor. Sometimes it's government. So when I think about KPIs, I think about the spectrum of stakeholders and how we represent that group sitting in the C-suite and thinking about the business decisions that we're making vis-a-vis our competition, vis-a-vis the products that we're launching, vis-a-vis policy that will or won't affect our business. So those are some of the things that to me are the changing dynamic. I think we've all gotten more facile thanks to digital technology at KPIs that we didn't have certainly 10 years ago, not even 5 years ago. I think the demand I hear from my colleagues outside of marketing is great, you know the stats. Why are they important? How are they going to impact the business? So it's the old data to insights and why it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. Chris Momberg makes that reference of, you go in and tell your CEO how many likes you have, and it's the old, why do we care? And matter of fact, that actually doesn't matter. There's a different level of stats as we sort of look in some of the insights that we can drive out to it. I think you touched on a point is really, and a little bit to actually a conversation that we had earlier in the week, Kofi, when you think about it is the intersection of the CMO now into so many other parts of into the parts of the organization. And even as your ability to sort of predict where the consumer is and going and where the consumers are going to engage, how that impacts of how you could potentially look at, supply chain, how you could look at so many other things in there. So some insight on your side would be great.
Yeah, I mean, my general take on this question is like the best brands and the best businesses do one thing better than their competitors, which is they just meet customer needs, right? Like when you really look at all the great brands and businesses we love, that's the one thing they do. So then for me, when I think about the role of the CMO, it's like, how do you bring that voice, like Linda said, into the business, but not just into the marketing organization? How do you bring it throughout the entire business? How do you influence product teams in terms of what the roadmap needs to be? How do you influence engineering teams in terms of what they're building? How are your sales team being part of that conversation? And I think what we've found over the past 3 years, particularly in our business, is that like all of the underlying models, and I think many people here will experience this in terms of your forecasts and your economics, none of those models work anymore. Right? So like the underlying data that you're building your business around, now the job of marketing as well is to figure out like, we've all lived through this, which is like, is food delivery going to persist? Are people going to go back to restaurants? How do we think about companies like Zoom that benefited immensely from the last 3 years? And so the job has also become, how do we actually predict new models? How do we think about where consumer behavior is going to go and what we have to build as a result? And for a lot of this, there's not a roadmap. So, using data, using insight, talking to customers, and frankly, using intuition about where we think the business is going to go is a big part of the job right now.
Right. To pivot slightly, so Bonin, on your side of it, I think it's interesting. We think about what I would say is a current evolving and transforming, especially as you guys look at what the work you're doing at Group Black and things like that. So, talking about, as you guys are looking at the, really the focus on how media and investment in media are occurring as we go through this. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have the wrong title for this panel, actually. I just realized that. So I have to go.
You've done this job, though, Bob.
Right. But what's funny is that when I left Mondelez, I said I was not going to take CMO title. I was going to take Chief Growth Officer title because I thought that if my mind was set on growth, because I looked at, if you really look at the Fortune 100s in aggregate, it's almost like flat is the new up. It's like, just don't lose money, and we're good here. And so, but it's funny at the same time we talk about growth marketing. And I'm like, well, shouldn't all marketing be growth marketing? No, just this marketing is for growth. This is just for, incrementality. So, and I guess where I'm going is that I think that Kofi, everybody said all the things, right? But I think Kofi piece that I stuck with is, and I spoke this morning to one of a big Fortune 50 with their marketing department, and the only constant is that the consumer changes. And the real issue is how fast can you change to meet the consumer? And that's what we see all the time. And change is scary, and that's why large organizations, they know, you yourself are a consumer. I remember when I took over the e-commerce job, a certain leader was like, do we really think people are going to buy Oreos online? I was like, oh, good, I took the right job. Hey, guess what? They will. We win. So, but the question was, how fast could I get the organization to meet that? And that became 50% of our total now growth on that business, right? And so when I think about what the work we're doing, it's one thing to say, so look, we've aggregated, we're the largest black-owned media company, yada, 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 and it's a model that's investing in emerging businesses because nobody else was going to, but also giving a way for people to deliver and invest at scale. And it's a model now for African Americans. That was tip of the spear, but we see it, women, it goes on and on. But the biggest piece there, and this is what I said to these guys this morning too, is I look for places where there's untapped opportunity to unlock growth. And the bottom line is when you look at these markets, like when we bought Essence was losing $10 million. It had 136,000 people that had gone to the event. If you look at Essence Festival today, 630,000 people went to it. We put $40,000 of EBITDA on the business. So we just realized that there was an untapped market to invest in. And I don't know where else you can source growth right now other than the uninvested in, diverse multicultural markets, and that's where there's a huge opportunity. So that's a long-winded answer to say that I think that it's about growth, but really about figuring out where the consumer's going and how you're going to move the organization to get there as fast as possible.
Yeah, I mean, all growth is a function of reaching underserved audiences, right? And so figuring out that the most underserved audiences and being able to get to those audiences, and we know there's an enormous amount of opportunity there. And frankly, businesses haven't moved quickly enough.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely on the underserved. And I think there's another interesting aspect that sort of comes in as we think about a recent effect that actually created a different way of serving the audiences. If you think about the effect of COVID and access, and I laugh about it because I think about everyone had a digital transformation plan pre-COVID, right? And then when the lights actually went off, the vast majority of them were thinking, oh, good Lord, I actually do not have a plan. It wasn't effective. It's not what I wanted to do. It's actually not working. And it really, a lot of those sort of organizations are starting to come back and sort of rethink sort of that, that digital transformation plan. Linda, I mean, how did you all sort of look at it as you sort of look out into the marketplace as you think about, what happened to the digital, ultimately these digital transformation plans that existed and, sort of how you see sort of the evolution of those as we go forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was thinking, listening to Bonin and Kofi, we're in the middle right now of strategy reviews. We do them every fall with each of our big businesses, and we try to answer two simple questions: what game are we playing, and how can we win? And so I kind of think about that as I'm listening to the conversation we're having, because they're such simple, fundamental questions, and yet it's all about, the strategy of understanding the business that you're in and then understanding what it's going to take to win. So Matt, let me go back to your question. COVID and digital transformation. I'll give you maybe two examples quickly. One is we're in several businesses. One is the aerospace business, aviation, and March 20, our business dried up overnight. So people stopped taking planes, which meant our single most profitable business, both from a sales and a service point of view, stopped on a dime. And it was, such an awakening. And I think there are things that you can do that are transformational. I was on the board of Dunkin' during COVID, and we realized that all of the digital transformation that we were in the process of doing wasn't fast enough because people were not going to go into stores. They wanted mobile ordering. They wanted digital signage boards. And I guess there's nothing like, what's the saying? Don't waste a good crisis. So I think that those needs changed overnight. And, people who had to jump on them. And I think in that category, quick service restaurants, I think Obviously, some others, Panera and Starbucks, had to jump on it. I mean, I'd be really curious to hear how our friend at DoorDash is gonna answer this, because I think it transformed business models. But the other example I'll give quickly, as you said in my introduction, I also look after learning here at GE, and we had rebuilt how learning was going to come to life at GE, literally wipe the sheet clean, come up with 3 wonderful new programs that we have yet to have anybody in a classroom. So we immediately pivoted to digital and looked to create the best possible experience we could, not the best, hey, we used to be in a classroom, now we're on a screen experience, but what is a truly amazing experience? And in some ways, COVID, I think, forced all of us to ask those questions, not just how do we manage, but how do we manage to a really wonderful experience, not just good enough.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kofi. I mean, obviously, during COVID, you became a major part of sort of the supply chain after it. And even after this post-COVID world where you look at the inability to hire delivery drivers, right? So when you order a pizza now, it's someone from DoorDash that's actually sort of delivering those things. How do you see sort of your post-COVID sort of digital transformation still continuing to evolve here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had because we're at the heart a digital business. So that part of it wasn't hard. The part that was actually really complicated is the logistics. So it's like overlaying the digital on top of the real world and figuring out how to make all of these things work at a much more sort of elevated scale. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Like early on, the marketing organization, we had to go figure out how to like procure PPE for millions of Dashers. So we had to build an entire PPE pipeline in marketing to get gear, gloves, masks, bags to all of our Dashes. We had to figure out things that now feel very natural to all of us. But if you remember in February 2020, when you got a delivery, you had to meet the person at your door. You actually had an exchange. And so changing that from that modality to like drop it off seems like a simple thing, but it's wildly complicated because all sorts of strange things happen as a result, right? So then like you're missing an incorrect. Will spike because like the thing got left somewhere and like people can't find it. And we had to like build all of this in a matter of 10 days. Like change and re-educate all of our Dashes that like now it's about a drop off. We had to build in the feature of like, how do you take a photo and leave it so people know where it is? So there was all of this real world digital interplay that was like massively complicated and building all of that through that time. And then I think as we've, gone through it, we've also now gone into new categories, those huge demand from a consumer perspective of like, okay, I don't just need restaurant delivery, I need everything delivered to my home. So how do I now get to like groceries and convenience and pet stores? And again, these things seem basic, but they're all wildly different in terms of how you fulfill it. So one of the things that DoorDash is all of us dash, right? So everyone in the company has a requirement to go out and make a delivery at least once a month. So you understand the experience, you see each side of the marketplace, you see the merchant experience, the consumer experience, the dasher experience. I got a dash to go to a pet store. I don't have a pet. I've never shopped in a pet store before. I literally have no idea how pet stores work. And that's like a really difficult experience, right? And that's what we're putting our dashes through. So then you go, oh, well, like for each of these things, you actually have to redesign a whole new training. You have to think about preferences. You have to figure out like who does what job, because it's very different shopping a grocery store, a pet store, than just dropping off something you picked up at McDonald's. So there's just been an enormous amount of learning over the past few years.
I just have one build. Whether it's digital transformation or any other part of your strategy, I think all of us are circling around this issue of not just meeting a consumer's need, but getting ahead of it, because change management internally is so slow. And so to be actually competitive, you have to get ahead of it. And there was something Kofi said about intuition that I think is something that is, it's an aspect of the CMO role or marketer's role in general that has not changed. Because a really good marketer has that intuition, whether it's because they're born with it or they live and breathe the consumer's life. I mean, when I was on Axe, I was sitting in frat houses, like having conversations with consumers, right? I'm not a frat boy. But the ability to have that intuition and then influence people who like to be influenced on data, but figure out how to influence them on both the data and the intuition so that you can get ahead. Because going into COVID, I mean, everybody knew digital is a really important thing, but a lot of organizations get into this, well, what's the business case? Because technology investment is so expensive, so how far are we gonna go on digital transformation? But the ones that had the intuition to know, I don't know when it's gonna happen or how it's gonna happen, but this is gonna be super important, are the ones that in COVID were able to pivot really quickly when everybody started shopping online, because they were already ready with that roadmap, or they had already done the influencing, or they were already in the middle of transforming because they'd gotten ahead of, you know, just what was going on in the consumer's life.
But I think there's two, you know, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think intuition, yes, you're either born with it, or exactly what you said, is that you live and breathe, and not just the consumer, other industries. I used to be told, if you're not in this building, you're not working. And I'm like, dude, if I'm in this building, you should fire me. I mean, literally, I won't be here, so don't worry, you're good. But because I was outside in the real world, where the real world happens, you know, and people are like, 3D printed Oreo, oh my God, that's genius. No, it's not. 3D printing was being done like 5-7 years before that. I just saw that there was an opportunity because it was absent, and really what we were trying to test was high throughput testing of product to see if we could actually learn how to learn faster around product. The other piece I think that's interesting is you know, transformation, digital transformation, change. We are actually really, really good at change. You know how I know? Because boom, pandemic hit and everybody changed. Right? So we always like, find me the change agent, the guy who's gonna put a rabbit out of the hat. Well, guess what? Everybody had to be a change agent, and they all did. We just don't give enough credit to our people, but more importantly, we don't put immovable opportunity in front of them. So that you had no choice but to change. So instead we go, well, maybe, give us a case. I think we need to be digital. I'm not sure. Where's the change agent? That person knows. No, dude, make a decision. Your organization is smart enough to move, and we forget how resilient people really are, and that's what I thought was very interesting about watching. Now, the crazy thing is that people are going to, unfortunately, slide back. So many people did things that changed the way their organization efficiently operated. Now, I'm worried about sliding back, and Kofi, I know you're going to say one thing, but the other piece I want to say is, the funny thing is it's not just big companies that struggle with the consumer change, it's small guys. So I don't know why I'm speaking at so many different places this week, but I spoke at the restaurant conference, and the small guys are like, oh, DoorDash, they suck. I said, do they? Because I saw a startup, they basically have these ghost brands, and they have 80 brands that you as a restaurateur can choose from that they're already built on DoorDash, and you could turn your kitchen into delivering 3 brands versus that one brand and transform. And I told these guys, I said, this is a bigger opportunity than I've ever seen in the restaurant industry. For free, you can have 4 franchises that are now delivering. I've never seen anything like that. So, you know, that's the other piece, is that it's not just us. People are just adverse to change. And getting that mindset change flipped, that every opportunity is an opportunity versus a challenge, that's where the real magic happens. Sorry.
Yeah, no, the other thing I was going to say is, like, we've actually been talking about, like, the conditions that create sort of, like, you have to change, or the crisis. Like, how do you actually keep some of that energy? How do you keep the energy of not having to wait to transform your business? How do you actually create the impetus for people to always be thinking about, like, what is the next thing that we're going to go build and how are we going to get better? It's like, yeah, you can wait for restaurants to say, like, look, DoorDash charges 30%, or you can say, I'm gonna change our pricing model to give you multiple price points. Like, you have to get ahead because there's always going to be an opportunity to innovate.
You guys must have gone through so much of that. Right? Yeah.
I think you talk about sort of sliding back into old ways. I think the challenge to it is when you had the crisis, you had to move forward, or the immovable sort of object. You had to figure out some way to come over it. I think the challenge to it is where, you know, where a lot of parts of the organization becomes risk aversion, right? And that's where everyone sort of starts to slide back a little bit from those type of things. And I think, I mean, even when I think about it, one of the biggest areas of sort of risk aversion is sort of in that sort of CIO role, where they have to protect the data, they have to make sure all the technology's up in there. And so, you know, I think there's probably, you know, what's that evolution of that relationship between sort of the CMO and the CIO, or marketing and technology, as you sort of look at that? I mean, how do you look at it, Linda, as you think sort of going forward here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like the CMO CIO one, at least in my own case, is more is something that we set out to solve fairly early. So early in my role in marketing here at GE, or CMO here at GE, it was so apparent that if we didn't become best friends, it was going to be this constant battle of, we have an idea, oh, sorry, get in the queue. We're not going to be able to execute it. And so we've tried, I think pretty successfully, to form that alliance early on. Where I think we are today is, so we have a good foundation. That's kind of what I'm saying. And I think without that foundation, I'd be pretty panic stricken, because you need that togetherness. I think part of the challenge I see is a lot of our CIO, CTO organization is rightly, understandably focused on cyber attacks and protecting the organization and not taking on unnecessary risks, all of which are like board level issues. They're critically important. And what I find can be a challenge is it can really be um, a little bit of a headwind when it comes to user experience. Because sometimes by being so protective and so bulletproof, again, which I support, you're in that, well, wait a minute, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. And the user experience can suffer as a result of that. Now, we're not a DTC business. My guess is the DoorDashes of the world and maybe, Walgreens, et cetera, have a better solve to this. But that's a balance that I think we are focused on today.
Yeah. Anisha, you think Walgreens is a better solve, so that relationship between tech and the CMO?
I mean, it's what Linda was saying. It's best friendship, and
Right.
it has to be in order for it to work. And actually, me personally, I grew up in CPG, and I left CPG at some point because I wanted e-commerce experience. I wanted to speak the D2C language and all that kind of stuff. So I went to more D2C oriented organizations, moved to Silicon Valley, where they speak a whole different language when it comes to marketing metrics and technology and all that kind of stuff, and immersed myself in it. And I remember at some point in my career, sitting down with my technology organization and being like, draw this out for me. I don't understand. I really wanted to become familiar enough so that I could speak the language and ask the right questions. And that's how you have a best friendship, right? You cannot be close to that organization if you don't understand, their challenges or their language or whatever. So then, come to Walgreens, there's all aspects of needing to partner with technology. So whether that's the digital transformation and MarTech implementation we did a few years ago, or even today, trying to look ahead and trying to think about how do we set ourselves up for success in the future. It is such a close relationship, and it's not just at the C level, like enabling my organization to speak that same language, training them, putting in the right capability building, so that, even at the manager level, you can have the right conversations is super, super important.
Right.
Yeah, but I think you guys do a wonderful job at consumer engagement personally. Right? Being a customer, I feel like you guys care about me, you care about my medications, you care about my savings, and you let me know that, but it's good. I feel like you do it in the appropriate way. Even the checkout experience with how they speak to you and what they say, and that's super important. There's other ones where, like, oh my God, there's one by me. I won't say who it is, but not a Walgreens, but a different one. But they're so nervous about the security that I can't literally take anything off the shelf. Like, I literally have to press the button and wait 5 minutes. I'm like, it's toothpaste, people. I'm just trying to keep brushing my teeth there. So anyway. Sorry. Yeah, I think all that's important.
So
Go
ahead.
sorry.
Go right ahead, Linda, please.
Yeah, no, I'm going to throw one other thing in, which Alicia triggered to me, which is, I think in so that we wind up speaking the same language, technologists and marketers. To me, what I try to bring forward, and maybe this is the marketer in me, is you start with the customer and you work backwards versus you start with the technology and work forwards.
Right. Yeah. So we have about 20 minutes or 20 seconds here. 20 minutes. I think I saw someone pass out in the back. Actually, that came out of my mouth. We have about 20. Any final thought from anyone? Like, what's that sort of next step after this or anything? Any we covered a lot of the transformation. I mean, it's an ever-evolving piece in there. So you have.
I'll throw one out. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in my career in the beauty industry, and in the beauty industry, like influencer market, we were doing influencer marketing before most industries knew what influencer marketing was. And actually, a few of us were at Brand Week a couple weeks ago and talking about the difference between an influencer and a content creator. And to me, at least in my world, like the future is a marketer is not actually going to be the marketer of their brand. It's going to be creators, and the marketers are just the enablers to that storytelling by someone else. And so that's what I'm thinking about right now is how do I release, like, I'm not going to do brand content anymore. It's going to be told through the lens of someone else. And how do we set up the right guardrails, but also allow for the freedom for that to be authentic? So that's one of the things that I think is sort of future looking.
Yeah, curators of their experiences as they bring it out in there. So, all right, I think we are obviously out of time. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it and everything. Hopefully everyone sort of enjoyed it. So.
Bye, Linda.
Take care, everybody. See you soon, I hope.